The Varn Collective had seen many species join their grand alliance, but they had never met anyone like the humans. To the Varn, humans looked simple, small, and soft compared to their tall, armored bodies and insect-like shells. Yet the humans had achieved more in a single century than most species did in 1,000 years. When the human team arrived on the Varn flagship Serenthus, every corridor buzzed with curiosity. The Varn officers lined up to greet them, their green exoskeletons shining under the ship's bright lights. The human group was made up of soldiers, engineers, and one man the others called Doc. He was not tall or muscular like the rest. He wore a white patch on his arm with a red cross. The Varn translators told their captain that this man was a medical officer. To the Varn, healers had low status. They obeyed warriors, not the other way around. The captain of the Varn, a strict commander named Threx, welcomed the humans with formal words. He studied their ranks carefully, trying to understand their symbols and badges. "Your command chain is clear," Threx said. "Your leader is the one with the golden badge." "Yes," answered Lieutenant Mason, the human officer. "I lead the team." Threx nodded slowly. "And that one?" He pointed at the quiet man standing behind Mason. "That's Doc," Mason said with a small smile. "He handles our medical needs." To Threx, that was enough to lose interest. A healer was not a commander. A healer was meant to follow. He turned away from Doc and continued discussing plans for their joint mission. The humans were to assist the Varn on a mining moon where strange chemical leaks had started causing damage. The Varn engineers had been trying to fix the problem for days but had made little progress. The humans offered to help with new equipment and safety systems. When the meeting ended, the Varn officers went back to their stations. The humans followed their guide to the guest quarters. The Varn crew whispered among themselves as the group walked by. Some laughed softly when they saw the human called Doc carry heavy medical bags by himself. The Varn medics would never do such work. They had servants for that. But Doc did not seem to mind. He looked calm and steady, walking behind his team without complaint. Later, inside the human quarters, Lieutenant Mason gathered his team. The air was filled with quiet excitement. Working with the Varn meant trust, and trust was hard to earn among alien species. Mason explained the plan again, showing maps of the mining moon. The others nodded and checked their gear. Doc listened in silence, then began preparing his medical tools. He checked oxygen levels, sealed med packs, and ran diagnostics on small drones that could deliver treatment in dangerous areas. When one of the younger engineers asked him why he packed so much, Doc smiled and said, "Because accidents happen when you least expect them. Better to be ready than sorry." His voice carried calmness, and it made others feel safer just hearing it. The next morning, both teams boarded a shuttle to the mining moon. The atmosphere outside glowed faint yellow due to chemical dust. The Varn pilot warned that the air was thin and filled with toxins. The humans put on sealed suits with clear helmets. The Varn wore armor with breathing filters. From the window, the moon looked broken and dry, with huge pipes running across its surface like metal veins. When the shuttle landed near the main refinery, the ground trembled slightly. The chemical reactors were unstable, and warning lights flashed across the complex. The Varn captain gave quick orders through his translator. His crew began scanning the site with tall sensor poles. The humans started setting up small portable shelters for the injured workers. You might find, Doc walked around the landing area studying the terrain. He saw cracks in the ground and smelled a faint burnt scent inside his suit. He moved slowly, checking each step. A group of Varn engineers passed by him and laughed. One said in a sharp clicking voice, "The healer moves slower than an old crawler." Doc ignored them and kept inspecting. He found small traces of leaking gas coming from underground vents. He placed markers around them and warned the humans not to step near. Mason noticed his work and said through the radio, "Good eyes. Doc, we could have lost a boot or two there. Better boots than people," Doc replied quietly. Hours passed as the team worked together. The Varn officers focused on following strict procedures written in their manuals. Every action required approval from Captain Threx. No one acted without a direct order. The humans found this strange, but they respected their hosts. When Mason asked if they could start repairing the cooling lines, Threx replied that he must confirm it with his command center. That took nearly 30 minutes. Meanwhile, more warning lights appeared on the refinery walls. Suddenly, a loud alarm echoed across the valley. The ground shook hard. One of the reactor towers released a thick green smoke that spread fast through the wind. The Varn shouted in panic, trying to contact control. The humans reacted immediately. Mason yelled, masks tight. Move to safe zone. The soldiers guided engineers to cover. Doc was already moving toward the tower. He saw 2 Varn workers lying near the base, motionless. Doc, where are you going? Mason shouted, those 2 are down. I'm bringing them out, Doc answered. Without waiting for permission, he ran into the smoke. His sensors beeped rapidly as the air grew toxic. He reached the fallen aliens, both barely breathing. Their armor was cracked, leaking black fluid from the suit joints. Doc grabbed one by the arms and dragged him away. He placed an oxygen patch on the alien's breathing port, then went back for the second. The Varn watching from afar were shocked. None of their medics had ever run into danger without orders. When Doc brought both to safety, he began checking their vital signs. Heartbeat weak, but stable, he said. He used a portable injector to clear the toxins. The Varn medic arrived late, still setting up equipment. He looked at Doc in confusion, unsure how this human worked so fast without orders. The medic asked, "Who gave you permission to act?" Doc looked up briefly and said, "No one. They needed help. That's enough." His voice was calm, not proud, but firm. More explosions shook the ground. The gas from the cracked tower spread into other sections. Alarms screamed again. Captain Threx shouted commands, but the noise made it hard to hear. The Varn crew hesitated, waiting for clear directions. Doc turned to the humans and said, "Mason, get your team ready. Seal the western vent. We can stop the chain reaction." Mason nodded immediately. No one questioned him. The humans moved like a single unit. Following Doc's directions, even though Mason was their official commander, Threx noticed and shouted through his cums, "Human healer, you have no authority to give orders here." Doc ignored him. "If we waste time arguing, we all die," he said while checking his scanner. The humans tightened their grips on tools and ran toward the vent line. The Varn officers looked at each other, uncertain whether to interfere or assist. Within minutes, the humans managed to close the vent manually. The pressure began to drop. The smoke thinned slightly. Threx realized the healer's orders had saved them. He said nothing, only stared at the small man who was now treating more injured workers with steady hands. After hours of work, the area became quiet again. The fires were out. The air was cleaner. Many Varn had minor injuries, but none had died. Threx approached Doc, who was cleaning his tools near the medical tent. "You acted without command," Threx said in a low tone. Doc looked up. "I acted because waiting would have killed them." "You broke the chain of authority," Threx said. Doc wiped his hands and replied, "Sometimes saving lives is more important than rules." Threx said nothing more. He turned away, confused but thoughtful. He had studied hundreds of command systems. None worked like this. No one disobeyed an officer in Varn society, yet this human had ignored him, saved his people, and now stood quietly, as if nothing special had happened. That night, while the teams rested in the shelters, Threx visited the Varn medic who had seen the entire event. "What do you think of that human healer?" Threx asked. The medic replied, "He is not like any healer we know. He commands without asking." "And others obey him without question?" Threx asked. "Why?" The medic thought for a moment. "Because when he speaks, they trust that he will keep them alive. It is not command. It is belief." Threx walked away in silence. Outside, he saw Doc sitting by the fire, checking the pulse of an injured worker and talking softly to calm him. The glow of the flames reflected off the human's tired face, yet his eyes were full of focus and care. For the first time, Threx began to understand that power did not always come from rank or orders. Sometimes it came from something deeper, something the Varn had never studied. That night, the Varn captain could not sleep. The human medic had shaken his understanding of leadership. He wondered how such a simple man could make warriors obey without rank, how his calm could silence fear, and how his courage came not from command but from compassion. When the morning light rose over the broken mining moon, the humans were already preparing for repairs again. Doc was among them, moving quietly, checking supplies, and smiling faintly at his team. The Varn watched him closely now, realizing that this human might be far more than a healer. The day had shown them that ranks could fail, orders could confuse, but when Doc acted, everyone followed, and no one questioned why. The next morning began with the taste of metal in the air. The mining moon looked quiet, but under the surface, danger was waiting. The chemical reactors had survived the previous day's shock, yet the sensors showed that pressure was rising again deep below. The Varn engineers gathered around a holographic map trying to understand the readings. Captain Threx stood tall beside them, his armored plates reflecting the light of the morning, sun that filtered through the dusty sky. The human team worked near their shuttle, repairing tools and checking the safety systems. Doc moved among them with calm eyes, helping where needed. His hands were steady, his voice always quiet but full of confidence. The night before he had saved many lives, but he spoke of it as if it were nothing. He never looked for praise. He only cared that everyone was safe. The Varn crew looked at him differently now. They no longer laughed when they saw him carry medical kits. Some even nodded in respect. Yet Captain Threx still struggled to accept what had happened. He believed in order, command, and ranks. He believed no one should act without permission. The human way felt strange to him, like a machine running without control. He walked to Lieutenant Mason and said in his deep voice, "Your healer acts beyond his role. In my command, that would not be allowed." Mason smiled politely. "Doc does what needs to be done, Captain. When time is short, we trust him." Threx crossed his arms. "He has no authority," Mason replied. "He has something stronger than authority. He has the trust of everyone around him." Threx said nothing. His eyes followed Doc as he spoke with a young Varn worker who had lost a hand during the explosion. The worker looked nervous, afraid of the human tools. Doc knelt down beside him and said softly, "You are strong. This new hand will help you again." His calm tone eased the alien's fear. He fitted the worker with a temporary prosthetic that could move with muscle signals. When the hand twitched open, the worker's eyes widened in shock and joy. Threx watched in silence, unable to deny the quiet power of this man as the day went on. The pressure readings from the underground levels became worse. The mining moon had a network of tunnels, and one section deep below had become unstable. If the gas chambers there exploded, the entire colony could be lost. The Varn engineers argued over which protocol to follow. Some wanted to evacuate. Others believed sealing the tunnel would work. Captain Threx ordered them to wait for his final decision. But time was running out. Inside the human shelter, Mason and his team gathered around their scanner. The display showed the same readings. "If that chamber blows," Mason said, "the surface will crack wide open." Doc checked the pressure data on his tablet. "We have less than 2 hours before it reaches critical point." Mason sighed. "And the Varn are still arguing about the right procedure," Doc said quietly. "Then we cannot wait." Mason looked at him and nodded. "You plan to go down there?" "Yes," Doc replied. "If we can vent the gas manually, we can stop it." "It's dangerous," Mason warned. "It's more dangerous to do nothing," Doc said. Mason knew better than to argue. He had seen Doc face worse. He gathered 2 engineers and a security guard to join him. Together they prepared oxygen packs, filters, and emergency lights. When Threx heard they were leaving, he confronted them at the airlock. "You are disobeying orders," Threx said. "I have not approved this mission." Doc met his gaze. "You can stay and wait for orders, Captain. But if that chamber goes, no one on this moon will survive." Threx's eyes narrowed. "You risk all your lives," Doc answered. "We risk them so others do not lose theirs." For a long moment, the alien captain said nothing. Then he stepped aside. "You will take 2 of my soldiers," he said. "If you die, it will not be said that the Varn stood aside." Doc nodded. "Agreed." The tunnel entrance was narrow and dark. Steam hissed from cracks in the walls as they descended deeper. The air grew hot and heavy. The light from their helmets shone on jagged rock and twisted metal pipes. The humans moved with care, while the two Varn soldiers followed behind, their heavy feet echoing through the passage. The deeper they went, the more unstable the sensors became. Static filled the radio, cutting them off from the surface. After 30 minutes, they reached the lower level, where the gas chamber was located. The door ahead was half melted from the previous blast. Doc crouched near it, scanning the lock. Pressure is high. We opened this too fast. It might blow in our faces, he said. Mason knelt beside him. How do we handle it? Doc replied, we make a small vent hole first. Enough to release pressure slowly, took out a portable drill, and began making a tiny hole in the door's corner. The gas hissed out like an angry whisper. The Varn soldiers stepped back in fear. The pressure meter on Doc's wrist began to drop slowly. It's working, he said. Keep it steady. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from the wall behind them. One of the tunnels started to collapse. Dust and debris filled the air. The humans ducked for cover as stones fell around them. A heavy beam struck one of the Varn soldiers, pinning his leg. He screamed in pain, his armor sparking from the impact. The second soldier tried to lift the beam but failed. The ground trembled again, and part of the ceiling came down near the door. Mason shouted, "We have to move him." Doc ran forward, pulling out a plasma cutter. "Hold him still," he said. The cutter sliced through the metal beam, freeing the soldier. Doc quickly checked his leg. The armor was broken, and dark green fluid leaked from the wound. He took out a sealant and sprayed it, then wrapped a tight bandage. "You can stand now," he said. The alien nodded weakly. Before they could rest, an alarm on Doc's tablet beeped. "Pressure spike," he said. The vent hole had begun to glow red. The gas was heating faster than before. "We are running out of time," Mason said. "We can't stay here much longer," Doc replied. "Then we open it fully and vent it into the old shaft." They attached cables to the door and connected them to a small power tool. When the door cracked open, a rush of green vapor burst out, nearly knocking them down. The air shook like thunder. The Varn soldiers raised their shields to protect the group. The gas poured through the tunnel, escaping into a nearby vent shaft. For a moment, it seemed to work. But then the heat sensors flashed red again. "The pressure below the second chamber is rising," Mason said. Doc looked at the map. "If we vent that too, it might take the tunnel with it." "So what's the plan?" Mason asked. Doc thought for a second. "We flood it with coolant from the side pipes. It will freeze the reaction." The two engineers rushed to the side wall and opened the coolant valves. Blue vapor filled the tunnel, mixing with the green gas. The heat dropped slowly and the readings began to stabilize. Everyone let out a breath of relief. Then the floor shook again. A deep rumble came from below. "It's not done," Doc said. "The lower chamber is collapsing. We need to get out now." They started running through the tunnel. Rocks fell from the ceiling as the walls cracked. The lights flickered out. The only sound was the pounding of their boots and the echo of the collapse behind them. One of the engineers tripped, but Doc pulled him up without slowing. The exit was only 100 meters away when a huge explosion roared through the passage. The shockwave threw everyone forward. When the dust cleared, Doc was lying on his back, his helmet cracked but intact. Mason crawled toward him. "You all right?" Doc sat up slowly. "Still breathing?" One of the Varn soldiers pointed to the tunnel. The exit was blocked by fallen rocks. They were trapped. Mason looked at his scanner. "No signal to the surface? We're cut off," Doc said. "Then we make our own way." He stood and examined the sidewall. The old mining tunnels often had hidden maintenance shafts. After searching for a few minutes, he found a small metal hatch under the dust. "Here," he said. The engineers helped him pry it open. Cold air rushed in from the other side. They crawled through the narrow shaft one by one. The Varn soldier who was injured struggled to move, but Doc stayed behind him, pushing gently and keeping him steady. The passage was tight and filled with cables, but it led upward. After a long climb, they reached a hatch that opened near the surface. Light poured in as they crawled out onto the open ground. Behind them, the lower tunnel collapsed completely, with a final echoing crash. When they stood up, the humans and the two Varn soldiers looked at each other, covered in dust and sweat but alive. Mason laughed softly. "We did it." Doc looked back at the mining site. "We stopped it from blowing apart, but we still need to check the rest." They walked toward the camp slowly. When they arrived, the Varn workers stared in surprise. No one had expected them to return. Captain Threx came forward, his expression unreadable. "You survived," he said. Doc nodded. "The lower chambers are stable now. We vented the gas and sealed the cracks." Threx looked at the injured soldier and saw the bandage on his leg. "He saved my life," the soldier said weakly. "Without him, I would have died down there." The camp fell silent. Every Varn present looked at Doc with new eyes. Threx walked closer and said, "You acted again without my order." Doc answered, "I acted because waiting would have cost lives." Threx stared at him for a long moment, then said, "You have done what even my best could not. Perhaps I have more to learn about your kind." Later that evening, the team sat together under the fading light. Humans and Varn. The morning light spilled over the mining moon, painting the rocky terrain in shades of orange and gold. The previous day's chaos had left the camp quiet but tense. The Varn engineers were repairing machinery damaged during the collapse, while humans worked on portable shelters and medical tents. Doc walked among them, checking each team quietly, carried a small toolkit, his movements precise and calm. His presence had become a quiet anchor, something everyone turned to instinctively. Captain Threx observed from a distance. He had never admitted it, but the human medic fascinated him. The way Doc moved, spoke, and acted without hesitation unsettled the Varn captain. Authority in Varn culture came from rank, from history, from strict obedience. Yet here was a human who commanded neither, yet inspired full obedience and trust. Threx could not explain it, and it troubled him. Lieutenant Mason approached Doc with a new report. "Sensors show unstable readings in the northern reactor tunnel," he said. "If we do not stabilize it, another collapse could occur." The Varn are debating again. Doc scanned the data. "We cannot wait for debate. Gather your team. We will go together." Mason hesitated. "Captain Threx has not approved it." Doc smiled faintly. "Then we act. If we wait, it may be too late." As they prepared, the Varn officers noticed the humans moving efficiently. Each soldier, engineer, and medic followed Doc's instructions without hesitation. Some Varn muttered in disbelief. One officer said, "He has no rank, yet all obey him." Another replied, "It is not command they follow, it is trust." The journey to the northern reactor was longer than expected. The ground shook occasionally as minor tremors passed through the tunnels. Dust fell from the ceilings, and gas vents hissed faintly. Adjusting helmets, checking oxygen levels, and coordinating the humans. When a small piece of rock fell in front of a Varn engineer, he froze. Doc crouched beside him and said quietly, "Step around it slowly. Do not panic." The alien followed, amazed by the humans' confidence. As they neared the reactor, the first signs of trouble appeared. A pipe had burst, releasing a stream of toxic green gas into the tunnel. The pressure gauges flickered wildly. The Varn captain's voice echoed faintly through their radio. "Stop! You have no authority to enter this area without my command." Doc did not respond directly. Instead, he began giving clear instructions. "Engineers, close the secondary vent valves. Soldiers, move equipment to block the gas flow. Mason, monitor oxygen levels. Keep calm and stay focused." Ah! The humans obeyed instantly, moving as a single unit. The Varn soldiers hesitated at first, but soon followed Doc's lead when they saw the humans' speed and precision. Every command was practical, clear, and designed to save lives. The gas pressure rose suddenly, and one of the pipes threatened to rupture completely. Doc noticed it immediately. "The main valve will blow in 30 seconds, he said calmly. "We need to divert the pressure to the containment chamber." Mason glanced at him. "That chamber is unstable. It could explode, Doc replied. Better to risk a controlled release than a sudden explosion. Trust me. With the guidance of Doc, the team moved quickly. Engineers connected temporary conduits to the containment chamber. Soldiers carried emergency power supplies and reinforced the structure. Doc stayed at the center, giving instructions, monitoring the pressure, and tending to anyone showing signs of gas exposure. Time seemed to stretch. Every second mattered. One of the Varn engineers panicked and shouted, "We cannot hold it. The chamber will blow." Doc walked calmly toward him. "Focus on what you can do, step by step. One valve at a time." The engineer followed, guided by Doc's quiet authority. Slowly, the pressure began to stabilize. The containment chamber absorbed the diverted gas. The readings on Doc's tablet began to normalize. Captain Threx watched the operation from afar. He could not understand how one human could inspire such coordination. In Varn culture, disobedience usually led to chaos. Yet here the humans and even some Varn worked together seamlessly. Threx clenched his fists. He realized he had underestimated the human approach to leadership. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the tunnel. A support beam was failing. Debris fell, striking the floor near the humans. Doc immediately reacted. Mason blocked the falling section. Engineers stabilized the beam. Move quickly. The team acted instantly. Mason and the soldiers held supports as engineers secured the beam with fast-setting alloys. Doc guided them with precise words, never raising his voice, never panicking. His calmness spread to everyone around him, even the Varn who had moments ago doubted him. Within minutes, the danger passed. Once the tunnel was secured, Doc checked the crew for injuries. Several were suffering from minor burns and gas exposure. He treated each one methodically, never showing fatigue. One of the Varn soldiers, who had been skeptical all morning, looked at Doc and said quietly to Mason, "He is not a commander. Yet we obey him like one." Mason nodded. "That is because he acts with purpose, not orders." Doc packed his medical kit and turned to the team. "We must inspect the remaining chambers. There may be more weak points. Stay alert, move carefully, and trust your eyes." The humans and Varn moved as a unit deeper into the reactor tunnel system. The environment became more unstable. Steam hissed from broken pipes, and the walls trembled from pressure. Doc noticed cracks forming along the sides. "We need to reinforce these walls before the next surge," he said. They worked quickly. Engineers attached braces, while soldiers supported them. Doc guided every movement, checking measurements and giving immediate corrections. A misstep could have triggered a collapse, but under his direction, everyone moved safely. As they progressed, the team reached the main control room. It had been partially destroyed by the earlier explosion. Sparks flew from exposed circuits. The control panels were offline. Doc examined the system. "We can reroute power to stabilize the main chamber. Mason, help me with the manual override. Soldiers, secure the doors. Engineers, watch for leaks." Mason and Doc worked side by side. The human medic instructed the Varn engineers on how to reconnect the circuit safely. Within minutes, power flowed again, stabilizing the reactor. Alarms stopped blaring, and the pressure gauges began to normalize. The team exhaled collectively. Relief spread through the tunnel. One of the Varn soldiers said softly, "We would have died without him." Doc replied, "We are alive because we acted together." That is the strength of teamwork. Captain Threx arrived moments later. He looked at the humans and Varn around Doc. The sight made him reconsider his assumptions. "You saved them," he said to Doc. "Even without rank or order, commanded action that succeeded where my protocols would have failed." Doc simply nodded. When lives are at risk, decisions must be made. Waiting for approval can cost everything. Threx struggled to understand. "Your kind defies hierarchy." Doc replied. "We follow purpose, not symbols." When purpose is clear, people trust each other naturally. The captain looked around at the team. Humans and Varn worked side by side, their trust in Doc evident in every gesture, every move. Threx realized that leadership was more than ranks and authority. It was the ability to act with clarity, courage, and compassion. As the team prepared to leave the reactor, Doc made a final check. He ensured that all crew were accounted for, that the tunnels were reinforced, and that medical stations were ready for anyone exposed to gas or debris. Every detail mattered. Every life mattered. That evening, the team returned to camp. They were tired, but alive. The humans carried minimal injuries, while the Varn had more, but all were stable thanks to Doc's guidance. Around the campfire, Mason and the other soldiers discussed the day's events. They praised Doc quietly, not with grand words, but with respect. One young Varn engineer approached him and asked, "How can you remain so calm in danger?" Doc smiled faintly. "Focus on what must be done. Fear does not help. Preparation and attention do." Captain Threx stood nearby, watching. Human had taught him an important lesson, that courage, wisdom, and trust could command more than any formal rank. That night, Threx considered changes to his protocols. Perhaps his officers could learn from humans. Perhaps the Varn could understand that authority could come from action, not symbols. Doc sat quietly, tending to his medical equipment. He spoke softly to a recovering worker, explaining how to adjust a temporary prosthetic arm. His words carried calm, clarity, and hope. To those watching, he was not just a healer. He was a leader without rank, a guide without command. A man whose actions inspired loyalty and courage. As the stars shone over the mining moon, humans and Varn slept side by side, aware that the day had proven something remarkable. Ranks and protocols were important, but sometimes when lives hung in the balance, one person's clarity and compassion could unite everyone. Doc had shown them that lesson. The Varn would never forget it. The morning sun rose over the mining moon, casting long shadows across the fractured landscape. The previous days had left the camp tense, though alive. Repairs continued steadily, but a new report from the Varn sensors brought fresh worry. Deep within the main reactor, a core imbalance had formed. If left unchecked, it could trigger an explosion large enough to destroy the entire facility. The humans gathered around their scanners, while the Varn officers examined the readings. Captain Threx studied the display with a heavy frown. "This is worse than we imagined," he said. "The core could fail within hours." Mason nodded. "We need to act quickly." "Doc, what do you suggest?" Doc studied the readouts, his brow furrowed. "The imbalance is spreading faster than expected. We cannot wait for protocol approvals. We must go in and stabilize it manually." Threx's eyes widened. "Manual stabilization? That is extremely dangerous. Even with safety measures, the risk is unacceptable." Doc's voice was calm but firm. "Unacceptable would be doing nothing while everyone dies." "We have no choice," Varn officers murmured among themselves. Their culture valued caution, analysis, and strict obedience to orders. But Doc's calm decisiveness left no room for debate. Mason gathered the human team. "Prepare for immediate deployment. Keep your suits sealed, tools ready, and stay alert at all times." Doc walked among the humans, checking each one. He spoke to them quietly, instilling focus and confidence. "Remember your training. Move carefully, communicate clearly, and trust each other. We will succeed if we work as a unit." The Varn soldiers who were to accompany them looked uneasy. "We are not used to following someone without rank," one said. Doc smiled faintly. "Rank does not save lives. Prepared minds and steady hands do." The journey to the reactor core was long and treacherous. The tunnels were uneven and covered in debris from previous explosions. Gas vents hissed in warning, and sensors warned of unstable pressure zones. The humans moved swiftly, guided by Doc's clear instructions. The Varn followed more cautiously, learning to adjust to a leader who did not command with authority, but with clarity. Along the way, a minor collapse blocked the path. Rocks and metal blocked their way, threatening to trap them underground. Doc assessed the situation quickly. "Engineers, clear the debris carefully. Soldiers, secure the walls. Mason, monitor structural stability." As they worked, the Varn soldiers began to notice how Doc organized the effort. He never shouted. He never demanded obedience. Yet everyone worked in perfect coordination, responding immediately to his instructions. Even when pieces of rock fell nearby, no one panicked. Minutes later, they reached the main chamber. The reactor core glowed ominously, fluctuating between safe and critical levels. Warning lights flashed across the walls. The temperature readings showed intense heat. Doc approached the core and examined the control panels. We must divert energy through secondary conduits. It will stabilize the imbalance temporarily, but we need to manually adjust the regulator valves. Mason looked concerned. The regulator valves are exposed. Extreme heat. Anyone working there could be injured. Doc nodded. Then we go in, one at a time. Follow my instructions precisely. No mistakes. He moved toward the first valve. Heat radiated off the metal, making the air shimmer. One of the Varn soldiers looked at him and said, "You could die doing this." Doc smiled faintly. "Better to risk one life to save many." The humans followed his lead. Doc guided each movement, watching pressure readings, checking heat levels, and giving precise instructions. The Varn soldiers began to act differently. They no longer hesitated. They watched Doc carefully and learned to trust him without questioning his rank or authority. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared. A pressure vent had ruptured, releasing a plume of superheated gas. One of the humans was caught in the blast, knocked to the ground. Doc reacted instantly. He ran to the injured human, shielding him from further harm. He attached an emergency cooling device, stabilizing the victim. The Varn nearby watched in amazement. In their culture, no soldier would risk themselves without orders. Yet Doc moved freely, guided by purpose. Mason called out, "We need to finish the regulators." "Time is running out," Doc replied. "Keep focus. We move step by step. Panic will kill us faster than the core." The team worked methodically. Doc directed engineers to adjust conduit connections while soldiers supported the human team. Every instruction was clear, every action measured. The tension in the chamber was immense, but Doc's calm radiated outward, keeping the group steady. One of the secondary valves began to overheat. Sparks flew, and the metal glowed white-hot. Doc moved closer, his hands steady, adjusting the flow with a small tool. Valve pressure is rising. Mason, redirect coolant. Soldiers, hold the panel steady. Within minutes, the temperature stabilized. The core's readings showed improvement. The crisis was not over, but the immediate danger had been managed. The team exhaled collectively, relief washing over them. Captain Threx entered the chamber, looking around. The humans in Varn were sweaty, dirty, and exhausted, yet still organized. He observed Doc moving among the team, checking each person and ensuring everyone was safe. "You have done it again," Threx said quietly. "Even without rank, you command action that succeeds where my orders would have failed." Doc responded simply, "I only do what must be done. If we wait for orders, we fail." Threx frowned thoughtfully. He had trained for centuries in command. Yet he realized the human approach, based on trust, calm, and clear purpose, had saved lives. He had underestimated this kind of leadership. The team continued working on the core for several more hours. Doc guided them through each task, from stabilizing energy flows to monitoring heat levels and adjusting conduits. Every human and Varn soldier followed his instructions without hesitation. Even those who had doubted him earlier now moved with confidence. Trusting his judgment completely as the sun began to set, the reactor core was finally stable. The alarms stopped and the temperature readings returned to safe levels. Exhausted but alive, the humans and Varn emerged from the chamber. The Varn soldiers looked at Doc with newfound respect. One of them said, "We have learned something today. Authority is not always a symbol. Sometimes it comes from action, from purpose, from courage." Doc smiled faintly. "And sometimes it comes from caring enough to act when others cannot." Back at the camp, the humans and Varn celebrated quietly. Injuries were treated, and equipment was repaired. Mason approached Doc. "You did it again. Everyone followed you without orders." Doc shook his head. We all did it together. Trust made it possible. Without teamwork, even the smartest plan fails. Captain Threx stood nearby, watching the interaction. He had always believed leadership required rank and obedience. But after witnessing Doc in action, he realized that true leadership could come from courage, calmness, and a willingness to act for others. That night, the camp was quiet. The stars shone above the mining moon, reflecting on the exhausted but alive team. Doc moved among them, checking medical stations, talking quietly to those recovering from injuries. The humans and Varn alike trusted him completely. Threx walked alone to the edge of the camp, thinking. He realized that humans had a quality he could not define, but recognized immediately. They could inspire loyalty, courage, and cooperation without formal ranks or authority. Doc embodied that quality perfectly. He was not just a healer. He was a leader, a guide, and a protector. As the camp settled under the night sky, the humans rested with calm hearts. Doc checked each station one last time, ensuring safety. He spoke softly to the injured Varn, explaining minor treatments and reassuring them. His presence brought confidence. Captain Threx watched silently. Understanding that the lesson of this human would change how he viewed leadership forever. Doc's quiet authority, based on action, compassion, and purpose, had achieved what strict protocol could not. The mining moon slept quietly under the stars. The humans in Varn were safe. Yet Threx knew that the challenges ahead would test them again. But for now, he had seen the power of human leadership in its purest form, and he would never underestimate it again. The aftermath of the battle left the human fleet floating quietly among the stars. Ships were battered, some lights flickering, and alarms long silenced. Smoke curled from minor damage in a few vessels, but the humans moved calmly, almost like they had expected this chaos all along. Doc walked through the corridors of the command ship, checking on crew members. Each greeting, each nod, carried the respect of years of quiet leadership. He did not need a formal rank to be heard. The Vakari delegation, still aboard the main observation vessel, watched silently. Their eyes were wide with confusion and something they could not easily name. In their culture, command was always tied to rank. No one of lower status could give orders, and any attempt to do so would be met with punishment or dismissal. Yet here, the humans listened to Doc with absolute trust. Every suggestion he made was followed without hesitation. Commander Tavel, senior Varkari officer, finally broke the silence. "How can this be?" he demanded, his voice shaking with frustration. "This human is not a captain. He holds no command rank. Why do they obey him?" Doc, sensing the tension, smiled politely. "I do not give orders. I suggest, if they trust me, they follow. That is all." Taval shook his head, trying to make sense of it. "But in our fleets, the one without rank cannot direct even one soldier. Here, entire crews obey without question. They are not afraid of you, yet they listen as if you are their superior." Doc stepped aside and gestured toward a group of engineers repairing a damaged hull section. "I have saved lives. I have solved problems. I have helped people do their best. Command is not about title. It is about earning trust and proving you can handle the responsibility when it matters." The Varkari eyes narrowed. Their minds, trained for decades of strict hierarchy, struggled to grasp this concept. In their fleets, obedience came from fear or obligation. Human obedience came from respect. The difference was subtle, yet it made humans unpredictable and dangerous. Meanwhile, the human captains were gathered in the command room. They spoke quietly among themselves, discussing what had just happened. None questioned Doc's authority in that critical moment. They only acknowledged that his guidance had saved countless lives. Captain Kor, a veteran of 3 campaigns, leaned back in his chair. "I do not know how he does it," he admitted to his peers. "He is not our commander, and yet he led us better than anyone could have with a rank. He saw the problem, knew what to do, and we followed because we trusted him. It is not about orders. It is about knowing what is right and having the courage to act." Even the youngest crew members whispered among themselves about Doc's actions. Fearless in the face of danger, calm under pressure, and always thinking of others first, he had become more than a medical officer. He had become a symbol of what it meant to be human. In moments of crisis, humans did not wait for orders. They acted, and they trusted those who had proven themselves. Across the fleet, the Varkari began reporting their observations to their homeworld. The message was clear. Human hierarchy did not follow the rules they knew. Anyone capable could lead. Respect and competence determined authority more than rank. The Varkari were not sure how to prepare for this kind of opponent. They had expected humans to be predictable like other races. Instead, humans were flexible, clever, and united by trust rather than titles. Back on the command ship, Doc walked quietly through the corridors, checking on the injured and speaking with the engineers. Each person he encountered felt calm in his presence. It was not fear that made them follow him. It was confidence. Confidence that he would act wisely, that he would help them survive, that he would make the right choice when others were unsure. A young technician, Mara, approached him nervously. "Doc, do you really think the Varkari will understand?" she asked. Doc smiled. "They will try. They always try. But humans are not easy to understand if you only look at ranks and titles. We are different. We act together because we care for each other, not because someone tells us to. That is what makes us strong." The Varkari delegation requested a meeting with Doc later that day. Commander Tavel entered the room, followed by several aides. They stood rigidly, still unsure how to address a human who held no official command. Rank but had directed a fleet in combat. Doc gestured for them to sit. "Please, have a seat," he said. His tone was calm and friendly, showing no hint of superiority, yet he spoke with authority. "You have watched us act. You have seen how humans operate in times of danger. I can explain it to you, but I doubt you will fully understand until you experience it." Tavel frowned. "We do not need to experience it. We study behavior. We observe, we report. Yet what we saw defies everything we know about command structures. How can humans decide to act without orders? How can they obey someone without rank?" Doc leaned forward slightly. "Humans are social. We trust those who show competence, courage, and care. Rank is useful, but it is not everything. When people see that someone has knowledge, skill, and concern for others, they follow willingly. That is why you saw our crew obey me. Not because I ordered them, but because they knew I would help them survive. Leadership is earned, not given." The Varkari delegates exchanged confused glances. Their leader Tavel tapped his clawed fingers on the table. "And this trust, it never fails? Humans always obey in this way." Doc shook his head. "No, sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes trust is broken. But humans value each other and are willing to follow those who prove themselves. In a crisis, it is the right thing to do. We adapt. We protect each other. We survive." A long silence followed. The Varkari had expected simple explanations. Instead, they had received a lesson in human philosophy. One that challenged everything they believed about structure, authority, and obedience. They realized that humans were not predictable opponents. They could not be understood simply by analyzing rank or titles. Humans were fluid, adaptable, and capable of unity in ways no one had predicted. Later, as the Varkari returned to their observation vessel, Tavel spoke quietly to his aides. "We must report this. We must warn others. Humans are not like the rest of the galaxy. They do not follow the rules we understand. They are dangerous because they are united by trust and not by orders. They can be led by anyone who earns respect. This Doc, he is only one example. Others will rise in similar ways. We must rethink everything we know about them." On the human side, the fleet repaired the damaged ships. Crews worked tirelessly, but spirits were high. There was a quiet pride in what they had accomplished. They had survived against odds that seemed impossible. They had acted as one, not because someone shouted orders, but because they trusted each other. They had learned once again why humanity endured wear. Others failed. Doc walked to the observation deck and gazed at the stars. He thought about the battle, the crew, and the Varkari watching them. Leadership could come from anyone. Courage could come from anywhere. Respect had to be earned, but once earned, it carried more weight than any title. A young crew member, Leanne, approached. "Doc, do you think the Varkari will tell others about what they saw?" Doc nodded slowly. "They will, and they will not understand completely. But they will know we are different. That is enough. Sometimes being understood is not as important as being respected. Humans do not need approval from others to act. We act because it is right. That is our strength." The fleet continued its journey, moving through the stars with quiet determination. The humans were not the largest, the fastest, or the most advanced species in the galaxy. Yet they were united. They were adaptable. They were unpredictable. And they were respected by those who saw their courage and wisdom firsthand. The Varkari left the system with a new understanding, but not a complete one. They would warn their homeworlds about humans, but they would never fully grasp what it meant to be human. Leadership, trust, courage, and respect were not written in manuals or titles. They were earned, and humans had shown it in action. Back aboard the command ship, Doc smiled faintly. There was no pride in his expression, only quiet satisfaction. He had done what he could, helped as best as he could, and the humans had proven themselves again. They would continue to face the galaxy together, not bound by rigid structures, but united by trust, respect, and shared purpose. That was what made them strong. That was what made them human, and in the quiet hum of the fleet, the stars stretched endlessly ahead, waiting for the humans to show the galaxy what it truly meant to lead without needing permission, to act without hesitation, and to inspire without commanding. The humans moved forward, ready for whatever challenge came next. In the legend of Dokant, the unpredictable strength of humanity was already beginning to spread among the stars.